The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I walked in, propped against the fruit bowl like it belonged there. My brother had placed it there deliberately. I could tell by the way he was standing near the hallway, pretending to look at his phone. "It came yesterday," he said without looking up. "I signed for it." He hadn't told me until now. That was the first thing I noticed. My name was on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. Grandmère Isabeau's script, careful and slightly tilted to the right the way it always was. She had been gone for 11 days. I picked it up and held it and didn't open it, not with my brother in the room. Let me go back a little. I grew up in a house in Gatineau, Quebec, just across the river from Ottawa, in a neighborhood where the streets were named after saints, and everyone knew which families had money and which ones only acted like they did. We were somewhere in the middle. My father left when I was 4, which made my mother the kind of woman who held things together with her jaw clenched, and my brother, the kind of man who confused being left in charge with being in charge. He was 6 years older than me. By the time I was old enough to understand how our household worked, the hierarchy was already built. My name is Selene. I work in forensic accounting in Ottawa, which means I spend my days looking at numbers that don't add up and finding where the story broke. I'm 31 years old. I am precise by profession and careful by habit, and I had spent most of my adult life assuming that the discomfort I felt around my family was simply a personality mismatch rather than evidence of something deliberate. Grandmère Isabeau was my mother's mother. She lived in a small house in the Outaouais region, 40 minutes from us, on a piece of land that had been in the family since before I was born. She kept a garden that produced more zucchini than anyone could reasonably use. She called me every Sunday. She never once made me feel like a burden, which made her different from almost everyone else I was related to. She was 83 when she died. It wasn't unexpected, but grief doesn't operate on logic, and I was not prepared for the specific shape of her absence. The Sunday phone calls stopped, and I kept reaching for them anyway, the way you reach for a light switch in a room you've rearranged. My brother Felix had moved back to Gatineau 3 years earlier after a business venture in Toronto did not work out the way he'd planned. He never described it as failing, he described it as pivoting. He moved into my grandmother's house for what was supposed to be 6 months and stayed for 31. He told everyone he was keeping her company. He told himself, I think, the same thing. What he was actually doing was something I only began to understand after she died. The letter stayed unopened in my bag for 2 days. Not because I was afraid of it, because I wanted to read it alone, with enough time to sit with whatever it said. I opened it on a Tuesday evening in my apartment in Centertown, with a cup of tea going cold beside me and the radiator making its irregular ticking sound. It was 4 pages, handwritten, dated 6 weeks before her death. She started by telling me she loved me, which she had always been direct about in a way my mother was not. Then she told me she was sorry. Not for dying. She was clear that she was at peace with that, but for what she called the arrangement and for how long it had been in place without my knowledge. She told me that Felix had been managing her finances for the past 2 years. He had suggested it himself, framing it as a way to spare her the stress of paperwork during her health decline. She had agreed because she trusted him and because she was tired. She wrote that she had not fully understood until nearly a year in what managing her finances had come to mean in practice. Approximately $62,000 had moved out of her accounts during that period. Some of it in transfers to Felix directly, labeled in ways that made them look like household expenses or caregiver payments. Some of it in credit card charges for things that had nothing to do with her life or her needs. A renovation to a property she didn't own. A vehicle she never saw. She had confronted him about it 6 months before she died. He told her she was confused. He told her the paperwork was complicated and she wouldn't understand it. He used the word confused 3 more times in that conversation, and each time she wrote it down afterward in a notebook she kept in her bedside drawer. She had not told my mother. She wrote that she knew my mother would protect Felix first, that she always had, and that involving her would only create a confrontation that resolved nothing. Instead, She had made an appointment with her notary. She had changed her will, and she had written me a letter. I read it twice. Then I sat with the 4 pages in my hands and looked at the wall for a long time. The feeling wasn't shock exactly, it was more like something you'd been unconsciously bracing for finally landing, and the impact was almost a relief after the anticipation. I had known something was off. I had seen it in the way Felix always positioned himself near any conversation about money or property or the future. In the way he deflected my questions with a particular kind of patience that wasn't patience at all. It was management. He had been managing me the same way he had managed her. I had just been too far away to see the full picture. I called her notary the next morning. His name was Mr. Arsenault, and he had been handling my grandmother's affairs for over 2 decades. He was measured and careful on the phone, the way people are when they've seen a great deal and learned not to react visibly to any of it. He confirmed that he had met with her. He confirmed that a new will existed. He said the reading was scheduled for the following Thursday and asked if I would be present. I said yes and asked if I should bring legal counsel. There was a brief pause. That would be advisable, he said. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Miss Tran, and she was recommended to me by a colleague who said she was methodical, unflappable, and deeply uninterested in being impressed by anyone. I liked her immediately. I brought her the letter, a summary of what I'd understood about the financial transfers, and the name of the notary. She reviewed everything without expression and then said, "This is more organized than most of what I see. Your grandmother was very clear in what she documented. She said we had a strong position and that I should say nothing to my brother or my mother before the reading. I didn't. The 4 days between that phone call and the will reading were some of the quietest days I've had as an adult. Not peaceful. Quiet in the way that a room is quiet right before something moves. I went to work. I audited a hospital billing discrepancy that had been flagged for 3 months. I ate dinner at my kitchen table and looked out at the street and thought about my grandmother's handwriting tilted slightly to the right and the way she always called on Sunday mornings, not afternoons, because she said mornings were for the people you loved and afternoons were for everything else. My mother called twice. I let it go to voicemail both times. She left messages that were carefully casual, asking if I was coming home that weekend, mentioning that Felice had been going through some paperwork and that things were a little hectic. The word hectic was doing a lot of work in that message. I didn't return the calls. The reading was at Mr. Arsenault's office in Gatineau, a low building near the river with a waiting room that smelled like paper and old carpet. I arrived early with Miss Tran. My mother arrived 10 minutes later, wearing the expression she always wore when she was anxious but needed to appear composed. She hugged me in the way that feels like a checkpoint rather than an embrace. Felix came in last. He was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before. He had his own lawyer with him, a man I didn't recognize, and the fact that he had one told me everything I needed to know about what he'd been told to expect. He looked at me when he sat down, and his expression was perfectly neutral, that particular neutrality that is itself a message. Mr. Arsenault read without introduction. Grandmarie Sabo had left the house and the land in the Outaouais to me outright. She had left her savings accounts, what remained of them, divided between a women's shelter in Gatineau she had been quietly supporting for 12 years and a college fund established in my name, to be used for purposes I chose. She had left Felix her car, her kitchen table, and a cedar chest that had belonged to her mother. The room did not react immediately. There was a full 3 seconds of silence before my brother said very quietly, "There's been a mistake." Mr. Arsenault looked at him without expression and continued. Grandmère Isabeau had included a detailed schedule as an attachment to the will, a document listing, line by line, every financial transfer that had occurred during the period Felix managed her accounts. Beside each item, she had written a short note in her tilted handwriting. Felix said this was heating oil. We have gas heating. Felix said this was for my medication. I checked my pharmacy records. I do not know what this is for. I asked. He said I was confused. She had also included a letter addressed directly to Felix. Mr. Arsenault read it aloud. She told him she had loved him. She told him she had wanted to believe for a long time that she was misunderstanding something. She told him the moment she stopped believing that was the third time he used the word confused. Because she knew her own mind and she had kept a notebook specifically to prove it to herself. She told him the choices she had made in her will were not punishment. They were consequences. She said she hoped he would build something honest with whatever time he had left, and she meant it without cruelty. Felix's lawyer leaned toward him and said something quietly. Whatever it was, Felix shook his head. He said the word contested twice. Miss Tran stood and noted, in the same quiet register she used for everything, that the will contained a clause under Quebec civil law stipulating that any challenge which was found to be unfounded would result in the challenging party bearing all legal costs and forfeiting any remaining bequest. She also noted that Mr. Arsenault had already flagged the financial transfers to a fiduciary oversight body and that whatever happened with the will, that process was separate and already in motion. Felix stopped talking. My mother had not said a single word through any of it. When I looked at her, she was looking at the table. Not at me. Not at Felix. Just at the table's surface, as though she were trying to read something written there. Felix's lawyer withdrew from the matter the following week. The challenge was filed and dropped within 10 days. The fiduciary review moved forward on its own timeline, separate from the estate, and I was told it would likely take several months to complete. My mother called me the evening after the reading. Her voice had lost the careful composure. She said she hadn't known. I think she believed that. I also think that not knowing had required a sustained and deliberate effort over 3 years, and that at some point the difference between being deceived and choosing not to look becomes difficult to locate. I told her I needed time. She asked how much time. I said I didn't know yet. That was honest. Philly did not call. I drove out to the house in the out-of-way on a Saturday in late November, the kind of day where the sky is flat white and the bare trees look like pencil lines against it. I had a key that had been my grandmother's. The garden was finished for the year, cut back and mulched, still holding the shape of all the summers it had contained. I let myself in. The house smelled like her, cedar and something faintly herbal, from whatever she'd been steeping the last time she was well enough to stand at the stove. The kitchen table was gone. Felice had taken it, which he was entitled to do. The absence of it made the kitchen look larger and colder than I remembered. I sat on the floor of the living room for a while, not because I was devastated, though I was grieving, just because it felt like the right posture for the moment, low to the ground, close to the things she had touched. She had left me something more than property. She had left me her clarity, a 4-page letter written in careful, tilted handwriting, a notebook full of dates and notations, a schedule attached to a legal document. She had built a record because she knew no one would take her word alone, and she had done it while she was dying, with what energy she had left, and she had done it for me. I thought about the Sunday morning phone calls, the way she asked questions and then actually waited for the answers. The time I was 24 and went through a period of being very lost, and she called every Sunday anyway without making the calls about the lostness, just about talking until it passed. I had never told her how much that meant to me. I think she knew. I work in forensic accounting. I find what people buried. My grandmother buried nothing. She recorded everything and made sure I would find it. I'm not sure if that's irony or symmetry, but I've been turning it over ever since. There are families that hold you gently and families that hold you in a grip you spend years calling love. And sometimes the person who holds you most gently is the one who leaves, and all you can do is carry what they left carefully enough to deserve it. Have you ever had someone document the truth for you before you knew you needed it and only understood later how much they'd been paying attention? I still think about the notebook. The one she kept in her bedside drawer, where she wrote down dates and amounts and the exact word he used when he dismissed her. Confused. She circled it 3 times on one page. She was 83 years old, her health was failing, and she sat in her bedroom and documented everything with the careful handwriting of a woman who had decided that the truth mattered more than keeping the peace. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the will, not the house, not the legal process that followed. Her. The kind of person she chose to be, quietly and consistently until the very end. Felix had counted on her being too tired to fight. He had counted on the rest of us being too distracted, or too conflict averse, or too accustomed to looking the other way when something felt wrong. He wasn't entirely wrong about that. My mother didn't want to see it. I had sensed something was off for years, but told myself it was just family friction, just his personality, just the way things were. I had talked myself out of trusting my own read on the situation more times than I can count. And that, I think, is the part I've had to sit with the longest. Not what he did, but what all of us, including me, had quietly allowed by choosing not to look directly at it. There's a cost to that kind of avoidance. It doesn't disappear because you don't name it. It accumulates. My grandmother didn't avoid it. She was frightened, I think. You can feel it between the lines of her letter. But she was more committed to honesty than she was to comfort. She made appointments. She asked hard questions. She wrote things down even when she was tired. That takes a kind of clear-eyed courage that I don't think gets talked about enough. Not dramatic courage. Not the kind that looks like anything from the outside. Just the quiet daily decision to keep being truthful even when it's inconvenient and even when the people around you are working very hard to convince you that you're wrong. I work in forensic accounting. My entire job is following a trail of numbers until I find where the story broke. I'm trained for this, and I still almost missed it in my own family. That tells me something important about how much effort goes into keeping these things hidden and how much effort it takes to see clearly when the people obscuring the truth are people you love. What I carry from all of this isn't bitterness toward Felix. It's more like a recalibration, a decision to trust what I observe, to act on what I know rather than what would be easier to believe, and to build my life in a way that doesn't require anyone else's dishonesty to stay standing. Grandma Izabo built hers that way. The notebook, the notary appointment, the 4-page letter, all of it was her saying, I will not let a lie become the version of events that survives me. I'm trying to learn from that, not perfectly and not all at once, but I'm trying.